The donut made her stop breathing for a second. Not from choking, from confusion. It sat there on the metal tray, round and soft, dusted with something white she thought was flour. Maybe soap, maybe medicine. It looked delicate, and that alone made it suspicious. Fried bread wasn't new to her, but this. It wasn't dense or gray or burned at the edges. It was light, puffy, air where bread should be. The kind of food you'd expect in a dream, not a prison camp. Hilda Weiss stared at it the way she used to stare at ration cards, with disbelief. The American cook had called it a donut. She had repeated the word carefully, uncertain, thinking it might be a joke. "That's a donut," he'd said again, ladle in hand. "Go ahead. Try it." She'd looked at him like he was testing her. Americans and their strange words, sloppy Joe, corn dog, hash brown. They made everything sound like a code, and a donut sounded like one too. Something between a warning and a taunt. The girl behind her in line whispered, "Maybe it's some kind of medicine." For morale, medicine. Yes, that made more sense, because nothing this soft could possibly be food. But the guards were eating them too. Laughing, talking, licking sugar from their fingers. That was the moment Hilda realized something terrifying. The Americans weren't pretending. They were really eating these things. She picked up the donut between her fingers. It gave way under the slightest touch. The sugar left a fine dust on her skin. Sweetness, something she hadn't smelled in years. For a moment she didn't move. Didn't breathe. Didn't trust it. Behind her, Sergeant Webb said something about hot coffee in seconds. Seconds? What kind of place offered seconds? Her stomach twisted before her brain caught up. Hunger had learned to hide behind discipline. You didn't reach. You didn't expect. You waited. That's what kept you alive during the marches and the waiting. But now the waiting was over. And she didn't know what to do with that. She bit into the donut. The first taste broke her. It was warm, unreal, soft as air and somehow sweet. Sugar, actual sugar. It melted against her tongue like snow. She froze, eyes open wide, jaw trembling. The laughter from the kitchen faded. The room narrowed, and everything she'd kept locked behind a uniform, the shame, the fear, the exhaustion, hit her at once. Her knees buckled. The donut slipped from her hand, bouncing once on the tray before landing in the dirt. She clutched the edge of the table, trying to breathe, but her chest convulsed instead. A sound escaped, not a sob, not laughter, something in between. The guards stared. The other women stared. And Hilda laughed. A sharp, breaking laugh that turned into shaking, gasping sobs. Someone thought she was choking. Someone else yelled for water. But she wasn't choking. She was feeling. She had forgotten what softness felt like, in food, in touch, in the world. When the crying finally stopped, she sat on the mess hall bench, trembling. Mascara smudged, fingers sticky with sugar. A nurse handed her a napkin, a kind one. The same woman who sometimes brought extra bread ends from the officer's kitchen. She didn't speak, just placed a paper cup of coffee in front of her and waited. Hilda's voice came out in a whisper. "It's so soft," she said. "It shouldn't be soft." The nurse smiled sadly. "You're safe now. It's supposed to be." The words sounded like another language, one Hilda wanted to understand but didn't. Outside, the Arizona wind scraped against the mess hall's screen door. The smell of sugar and frying oil mixed with desert dust and diesel. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played swing music, the kind the Americans used when they wanted to feel normal. Normal. The morning smelled of coffee and soap. For a moment, Hilda thought she was back in her mother's kitchen, until the clang of the mess hall bell snapped the illusion. Sunlight cut through the cracks in the barracks walls, stripes of gold over gray blankets. The sound of boots, tin cups, and English voices filled the air. Every morning felt the same now. Ordered, efficient, predictable. Almost military, but cleaner. Kinder. That, she decided, was the strangest part. She sat up on her bunk and stared at the folded blanket by her feet. Across from her, Anna was already dressed, hair tied back, humming some tune she'd learned from the American radio. They weren't supposed to have radios, but the guards didn't care anymore. "They said we can work in the kitchen today," Anna said. "Maybe they'll let us wash the trays." Hilda nodded, though she didn't trust her voice yet. The taste of sugar still lingered on her tongue from the night before. She didn't want to admit she'd dreamt about it. Outside, the Arizona air burned dry and sharp. The desert stretched out like another planet, endless beige dotted with barbed wire and the silhouettes of watchtowers. Somewhere beyond those fences, real life went on. Trains, markets, laughter. Here, everything moved slower, as if time itself had been taken prisoner. The guards had names now. She remembered them. Sergeant Webb, the one who'd offered her coffee. Corporal Jenkins, the one who always smiled too wide. It was easier when they were just uniforms, faceless symbols of victory. But faces made things complicated. They lined up for breakfast. Oatmeal today. The smell reminded her of wet cardboard, but it was warm, and that meant something. She carried her tray past the counter, watching the Americans joke as they ladled food. None of them seemed angry. None of them looked like the monsters she'd been warned about. "Morning, miss," one said, cheerful as if the barbed wire behind her didn't exist. "Careful, it's hot." She froze for half a second. "Miss." No one had called her that since the war began. Later in the kitchen, she learned what tuna casserole meant. The words alone sounded odd, even ridiculous. Tuna, she knew that word. Fish, but casserole? It could have meant anything. A code, a warning, something she wasn't supposed to touch. They handed her a bowl and told her to stir. The smell was unlike anything she knew. Creamy, rich, layered with something sharp she couldn't name. Cheese. She'd seen it once in a Red Cross package. "Don't let it stick," said the American cook. "You've got a good hand for it." The compliment startled her more than the heat. A good hand. No one had said that to her since she'd painted signs for ration depots back in Bremen. She'd almost forgotten what praise felt like when it wasn't followed by suspicion. When she turned, she saw the other POWs watching from the doorway. Some laughed, whispering, "Look at her, smiling for them." Others just looked tired. She stirred faster. At noon, they served the meal. Rows of women carried steaming trays to the long tables. The Americans ate with them sometimes, not beside, but close enough. It was strange to see the guards eating the same food. Stranger still to see them talking as if the war hadn't divided the world. Hilda sat down with her bowl, steam curling into the desert light. She hesitated before tasting it. The texture was heavy but soft, the flavor creamy, almost too much. Her stomach didn't know whether to thank her or revolt. "It's fish," she whispered. Anna laughed quietly. "Yes, and noodles," they said. "With milk, can you imagine?" "No," Hilda answered honestly. "I can't." For a long time they ate in silence. The air was filled with the scrape of metal spoons and the hum of a distant radio. Glenn Miller, maybe. The music was slow, full of brass and warmth. When lunch was over, she went to the washing station. Rows of tin trays waited in piles. The water was hot, scented faintly with lemon soap. As she rinsed, she caught her reflection in the surface. Pale, thinner than she remembered, but human again. Not a number. Not a warning. Later that afternoon, Sergeant Webb approached. "You did well today," he said. "You've got a knack for order. Ever work in a kitchen before?" Hilda shook her head. He smiled. "You could have fooled me." She wanted to tell him she used to paint, that her hands weren't made for scrubbing or stirring. But words failed. So she just nodded, unsure what it meant to be seen this way, as something useful. That night when the lights went out, she stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind. The donut, the tuna, the laughter. All of it felt like parts of a strange dream that didn't belong in a war. And for the first time since capture, she wondered if she might survive not just the war, but herself. The desert wind carried the smell of soap and something sweet, a scent that didn't belong to war. By mid-morning, the sun had already burned the sky white. Hilda wiped sweat from her neck and stared at the lines of laundry snapping between barracks. Uniforms, aprons, towels, all washed and pinned in order. Everything here had an order. Even mercy. Behind her, Anna was humming again, the same American tune from the radio, off-key but happy. "You hum like a child," Hilda said, pretending to sound annoyed. Anna grinned. Maybe that's the point. They were sorting linen in the storage hut when Corporal Jenkins appeared, carrying a brown parcel under his arm. "Delivery from the Red Cross," he said. "You ladies might like this one." Inside the parcel was a small cardboard box stamped with the words, U.S. Army Relief, personal goods. Hilda expected soap, or maybe powdered milk. Instead, she found silk. At least it looked like silk, fine, shimmering, and folded neatly in pale tissue paper. She lifted it slowly, feeling the fabric slide across her palms. It was soft, smooth, alive almost. What is it? Anna whispered. Jenkins smiled, clearly amused. Stockings. For the ladies. He turned and left before they could ask why anyone would send stockings to prisoners of war. Hilda stared at the fabric in disbelief. Why would they? She began, but couldn't finish. Back home, she had once traded her only winter coat for a pair like this. Not for vanity, for hope. Stockings meant normalcy, womanhood, something that war had stolen. Now, standing in a desert camp surrounded by barbed wire, she held them again. And it made no sense. That night, in the dim barracks light, the women passed the stockings from hand to hand as if they were holy relics. Some laughed, pretending to model them. Others cried quietly, clutching the fabric to their faces. They must be mocking us, one woman muttered. No, another said. Americans don't mock like that, they just give. The word give felt dangerous. Hilda couldn't decide whether it was kindness or a trick. Days passed. The Americans kept giving cigarettes, soap, magazines. One afternoon, a soldier walked past the fence and tossed over a box of something brown and glass. The bottles clinked when they landed. The women froze. For a moment, no one moved. Beer? Anna guessed. No, Hilda said softly. Not beer. A guard called out, Coca-Cola. Go on, it's yours. Coca-Cola. They'd heard the name before. Whispered rumors in the barracks back in Germany. Stories about a drink that tasted like victory. They hesitated, until Anna twisted one open. The hiss startled everyone. She took a sip and gasped. It burns, she cried, eyes watering. Then she laughed. Real laughter, not the brittle kind they used to survive. Hilda took her bottle carefully. The liquid fizzed and danced at her lips. Sweet, dark and sharp all at once. It was like drinking sunlight after living underground. Somewhere nearby, the radio played again. Swing music, drums, and brass that felt too alive for their gray world. Anna began to tap her foot. Then another woman joined her. Soon, laughter and clinking bottles filled the yard. Even the guards looked up from their posts, half smiling. For a few minutes, the war seemed to vanish behind a curtain of bubbles and sound. When night came, Hilda couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the wooden beams above her, the air thick with the smell of sugar and soap. She thought of Bremen, the ash, the noise, the taste of dust. She thought of her mother standing in a bread line, of the leaflets they used to read, all warning that Americans were animals. Animals didn't hand out stockings. Animals didn't share their drinks. The thought disturbed her more than she expected. She turned on her side and saw Anna asleep, smiling faintly. On the shelf above her bunk, the empty Coca-Cola bottle glinted in the moonlight like a trophy. For the first time in years, Hilda felt something stir. Not joy, not hope, but curiosity. What if everything she'd been told was wrong? The next morning she woke early and stepped outside. The desert stretched wide and gold under the rising sun. The air smelled faintly of oil and coffee. She spotted Jenkins near the kitchen setting up a record player. Music for the crew, he said with a grin. You like Glenn Miller? She didn't answer. But when he dropped the needle and Moonlight Serenade floated through the dusty air, she felt the same ache she'd felt with the donut, that fragile, terrifying reminder that the world could be gentle, and maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the enemy anymore. The air around the camp began to change, not in temperature but in tone. It was softer now. By early June, the desert heat wrapped everything in a shimmering haze. The women worked in the fields during the day and returned to barracks that no longer felt like cages. Even the fences looked different, still sharp, still cruel, but less absolute. Hilda noticed it first during breakfast. The guards didn't bark orders anymore. They spoke. Names had replaced numbers. Jokes had replaced commands. Morning, Weiss. Sergeant Webb greeted her one day, sliding a tray across the counter. We've got eggs today, real ones. Not powdered, she blinked. Real eggs. The smell alone felt like another world. She mumbled thanks and carried her tray to the table, unsure if she'd spoken loud enough to be heard. Anna joined her, smiling. He said my name too, she whispered, as if saying it aloud might make it vanish. The other women noticed. They still avoided looking directly at the guards, but the tension had thinned, the way fog thins when the sun insists on rising. After breakfast, Hilda was sent to the supply shed to help sort boxes. She worked beside Private Collins, a red-haired boy who looked far too young to be in uniform. He showed her how to stamp inventory tags, fumbling with his pencil and dropping it twice. "You remind me of my sister," he said, smiling awkwardly. "She's about your age. Bakes terrible bread, though." Hilda didn't know how to answer that. Compliments from enemies felt dangerous, like unexploded shells. But something in his tone was harmless, human. Later, as they stacked crates, she found a tin marked peach slices. She lifted it, confused. "Fruit," Collins said. "You can have one when the boss isn't looking." She frowned. "For prisoners?" "For people," he corrected softly. That word followed her all day. People. After work, she found Anna near the barracks fence, talking to one of the guards through the wire. Not whispering, not pleading, just talking. They were comparing words in English and German, laughing at mistakes. When Hilda approached, the guard nodded politely and handed them something through the fence. A small paper packet tied with string. Inside were colored candies, the kind children used to keep in jars back home. Anna stared at them like relics. "Why do they keep doing this?" she whispered. "Don't they hate us?" Hilda didn't answer. She didn't know anymore. That night, after lights out, someone began to sing. Soft at first, a lullaby in German. Then another voice joined in. And another. Soon the barracks echoed with a quiet, fragile chorus. Across the camp, a harmonica began to play. American, offbeat, but trying. And for the first time, the music didn't sound like theirs or ours. It sounded like something new. The next morning, Sergeant Webb visited the women's barracks. He brought a clipboard and a half smile. "We're opening a small sewing station," he announced. "Need volunteers." Hands shot up, not from obedience but from eagerness. Work meant time, and time meant distraction from the heavy silence of memory. Hilda volunteered. The sewing room smelled of fabric and oil. Machines lined the tables, old but functional. They mended uniforms, tents, flags, symbols of a war that still roared far away but felt strangely distant here. One afternoon, while she worked, the radio crackled to life. A reporter's voice announced that the Allies had taken Berlin. The women froze. Needles stopped mid-air, silence. Then someone dropped a spool. Hilda's stomach turned cold. She waited for celebration from the guards, but none came. Webb turned off the radio. "That's enough for today," he said quietly. "Get some rest." The women didn't speak for hours. That night, as the desert wind rattled the barracks, Hilda stared at the ceiling and thought of Bremen, of rubble, of her brother, missing somewhere between Dresden and nowhere. She thought of her mother, probably still waiting for letters that would never come. Guilt pressed heavy on her chest. The kindness here, the food, the laughter, the gifts, it all began to feel unbearable. As if she were being forgiven for something she hadn't yet confessed. She whispered into the dark. "We don't deserve this," Anna, half asleep, murmured. "Maybe that's what mercy is. Getting what you don't deserve." Hilda turned to look at her friend. "Mercy," she repeated softly, tasting the word like sugar and salt at once. Outside, the wind carried faint music from the guard's radio. The same swing tune, the same rhythm of life that refused to die, and Hilda, lying in the gray barracks of Camp Florence, realized something that frightened her more than any air raid ever had. She didn't feel like an enemy anymore. She felt human. Rain came unexpectedly. It wasn't real rain, just a stubborn drizzle, rare for Arizona, turning the camp dust into thin streaks of clay. The air smelled cleaner that morning, almost gentle. Hilda stood near the laundry lines, wringing out wet sheets. The rainwater made them heavier, and the wind slapped them like flags. She worked silently, humming a tune she didn't realize she'd learned. An American song, something about dreams and stars. Sergeant Webb passed by, umbrella tilted, jacket unbuttoned. "You'll catch cold out here," he said. She smiled faintly. "Germans don't catch cold. We out-stubborn it." He laughed, a soft, honest laugh, the kind she'd never heard from a guard before. Then he paused, watching her hands twist the wet linen with practiced strength. "You used to do this back home?" "I painted," she said, surprising herself. "Before the war. Painted?" "Signs, windows, once a mural for a school," she shrugged. "Then they needed us for something else." He didn't press. just nodded and walked on, boots leaving small dark prints in the mud. But when he passed again an hour later, he carried something small in his hand, a folded piece of paper. "Here," he said. "We're clearing the old storage shed. Found this." Inside was a sketch pad half used, the pages yellowing. A few broken pencils lay inside the cover. She didn't know what to say. "You're giving this to me?" He nodded. "Figured you'd do more with it than dust." The moment lasted a heartbeat, maybe two, but it changed everything. That night, after lights out, Hilda opened the sketchbook under her blanket. She tore a corner from the back page and began to draw her mother's kitchen, the stove, a small loaf of bread cooling by the window. The lines came shaky at first, then certain. By candlelight, she found her hands again. Word spread fast. Soon the other women came quietly asking for portraits for keepsakes. She drew them by memory. A child's face, a husband's eyes, a church steeple seen last before the bombs. For the first time, she didn't feel trapped. She felt useful. Days later, Sergeant Webb approached her again. "Got something for you to see." He led her toward the officers' quarters, not inside, but to the outer wall. There, hanging under a wooden awning, was a new bulletin board. On it, her drawings. Neatly pinned, names written beneath in careful English letters. "You did this?" she asked, startled. "Thought you might like to show the men what talent looks like," he said. "Besides, morale's better with art." She laughed softly. "You Americans and your morale," he grinned. "It's our secret weapon." From that day on, she began sketching during every break. Guards would stop to watch. Not mockingly, not curious, just present. Sometimes they'd bring her pencils or scrap paper. Then one afternoon, Collins came running, breathless. "Webb's down!" She dropped her pencil and ran. Near the supply shed, a truck tire had burst while being loaded. Webb had been standing too close. Shrapnel from the rim caught his shoulder. Blood ran dark down his sleeve. Without thinking, Hilda tore a strip from her apron and pressed it to the wound. "Hold still," she said sharply. "You'll make it worse." He tried to laugh, but pain bent his voice. "Bossy, aren't you?" "Quiet," she hissed. "You saved my art. Let me save your arm." The medic arrived minutes later, but by then the bleeding had slowed. She sat back, hands shaking, apron stained red. When the others found out, they stared at her as though she'd broken some unspoken rule. "You helped him?" One whispered that night. "After what they did?" Hilda looked up from her sketchbook. "He's a man, not a uniform." The room fell silent. Anna watched her for a long time. "You're changing," she said softly. "Maybe I'm remembering," Hilda answered. In the following days, Webb returned, arm in a sling, smiling lopsidedly. "Doc says I'll live. Guess I owe you." "You don't owe me," she said. "We're even." But something between them had shifted, not love, not friendship, just understanding. Two people who had stopped seeing enemies when they looked at each other. That evening, she sat outside the barracks with her sketchbook, the desert painted gold by the setting sun. For once, she didn't draw faces or fences. She drew the horizon, endless, borderless, free. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from the kitchen, and somewhere behind her, a guard whistled the same tune she had been humming days ago. It struck her then. Mercy wasn't one grand gesture. It was a series of small ones, unnoticed, unrecorded, but powerful enough to rebuild what the rumors began quietly on, as they always did. Someone said the war was over. Someone else swore it wasn't. The guards didn't confirm or deny anything. They just smiled a little more and looked less tired. The routine didn't change. Breakfast at 6, work detail by 8, evening roll call under the pale orange sky. But the air carried something new. Waiting. Hilda felt it most at night. The silence after lights out had changed its weight. It was no longer fear that pressed on her chest, and it was anticipation. She lay awake, staring at the wooden ceiling, her fingers tracing invisible lines on her blanket, as if sketching the world she hoped to see again. Bremen rebuilt. Her mother, older but alive, maybe even laughter that didn't feel borrowed. The next morning, the guards lined them up outside. The air was still cool, and the desert shimmered pale pink under the rising sun. Sergeant Webb stood at the front, arm still bound in a sling, looking different somehow, lighter. He cleared his throat. "Ladies, we've received official notice. The war in Europe is over. Germany surrendered last week." The words hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water. No one spoke. A few women looked down. Others stared blankly ahead. One began to cry, not from joy but from something older, heavier. Hilda just stood there, numb. Over. The word felt unreal. She thought of the cities burning, of boys sent to fight for nothing, of the faces she'd drawn from memory that might now belong to ghosts. Anna whispered, "Does this mean we can go home?" Webb hesitated. "Soon," he said, "but it'll take time. Transport paperwork. You'll be treated fairly." Fairly. The word stung more than she expected. What did fairness mean after everything? Later that day, the kitchen was unusually quiet. The Americans served a special lunch. Roast beef, bread, and something sweet again. Donuts. The same kind as before. When Hilda saw them, she almost laughed. It felt like a circle closing. Jenkins grinned. "Guess we're celebrating. Peace has a taste, huh?" She took a bite, slower this time. It was just as soft, just as unreal. But now it didn't feel like magic. It felt like memory. After lunch, she went to the sewing room. The machines were still, the tables empty. She opened her sketchbook, half full now, and turned to a clean page. This time, she didn't draw faces. She drew the camp. The guard towers, the laundry lines, the women carrying trays, the sky stretching endlessly beyond the fences. And right in the middle, she drew a table, 2 chairs, one occupied by a German woman, the other by an American soldier, a donut between them. She titled it Mercy. That evening, the sun bled red over the sand. A truck arrived, new uniforms, new orders. Webb walked to the barracks door, his posture uncertain. "You'll be transferred soon," he said. "Another facility closer to the coast. From there, you'll go home." Home, the word should have felt like salvation. But to Hilda, it felt heavier than chains. She had changed. They all had. Going home meant becoming strangers again. To the world, to themselves. That night, she packed her few belongings. Her blanket, her pencil stubs, the sketchbook. She slipped the drawing titled Mercy between its pages. When Webb came by one last time, she handed it to him. "For you," she said. He opened it, smiling faintly. "You made me look better than I do." "You looked kind," she said simply. "That's rarer," he paused, then nodded. "Take care of yourself, Weiss." "You too, Sergeant." Neither saluted. Neither smiled. They just looked at each other, the silence between them saying everything the war never could. The next morning, the convoy trucks rumbled to life. Dust rose behind their tires like smoke. The women climbed aboard one by one, each carrying the weight of memories that didn't belong in victory or defeat. As the camp disappeared behind them, Hilda turned once, watching the fences blur into the horizon. For the first time, they didn't look like walls. They looked like lines in a drawing, boundaries that could be erased. Anna nudged her shoulder. "What will you do when we're free?" Hilda smiled faintly. "Eat another donut, maybe," Anna laughed. "After all this?" "Yes," Hilda said, gazing out at the endless desert. "Because now I know what soft feels like, and I don't ever want to forget." The trucks rolled on, leaving the camp and its ghosts behind. The air shimmered gold and the road stretched into the unknown. In the distance, music drifted faintly from a soldier's radio. Glenn Miller again, the same song that had followed them through every small mercy. Hilda closed her eyes, letting the wind touch her face. For the first time in years, she didn't feel watched. She didn't feel hated. She just felt alive. And as the convoy disappeared beyond the last hill, the dust settled over the footprints of both prisoners and guards, together, indistinguishable, erased by the same sun. Years later, the smell of sugar still made her stop. Hilda stood in a small bakery on the outskirts of Hamburg, the sound of rain tapping on the glass. She was older now, not by years, but by the kind of living that stretches time. The war had ended, the camps dissolved, but the memories still clung like dust that refused to wash away. The woman behind the counter smiled. "Fresh batch," she said, sliding a tray forward. The donuts were smaller than she remembered, neater, civilized somehow. But the smell, that soft mix of flour, oil, and sugar banlan was the same. She reached for one, her fingers trembling. "I haven't had these since—" She stopped. The sentence didn't need finishing. Outside, a bus rumbled past, splashing through puddles. Children pressed against the window, laughing.